Welcome to Resume the Podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Page, and I'm here to spread the message that you can, in fact, be happy in your career. I'm a former executive recruiter turned career coach, and I am obsessed with learning about why people have chosen their career, what led them to that decision, and how they achieved happiness in the process. So, come join the ongoing conversation that exposes you to career paths of all origins with one thing in common: happiness. So, press play and let's resume the conversation with this week's episode. Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Resume. Today, I'm very excited because we have Beth Probst on, who I hope I said her last name right. I've been practicing. She is the founder of At the Core, which is an organization that is dedicated to transforming the way students approach their career development journeys. So we've had a couple people on in the past who talk about, adults. And today I'm very excited to talk about the beginning of that journey, where it all stems from. So Beth spent a lot of time interviewing and managing people. And throughout that experience, she encountered a lot of job candidates who struggled to articulate why they were even a fit for that position that they were interviewing for. And as a recruiter, I can tell you she's right. I know exactly what she's talking about. So her insight, coupled with her reflections on her own journey choosing her college major and even just her college institution, inspired her to create this amazing organization that offers guidance to students, I think as young as sixth grade, if I did my research properly, to help them more effectively choose a path towards a career that they will actually enjoy. So all of that aside, Beth is also a noted expert and speaker on career development, and she speaks frequently about college planning. Her speaking gigs vary from very large national audiences to small parent groups. Beth, that was a lot. You've been busy. Welcome.
Yeah, but we get to talk about that younger generation. Think about the world they live in today and how dramatically wide open the world of work is to them. And yet where they stand, with their phone in front of them, they may have a hard time kind of looking up and seeing what's out there. So that's really the opportunity that we like to kind of hone in on, is helping those students make great decisions as they head toward the end of high school.
Yeah, I think that's great. And it's so funny, that analogy that you just said, when you're looking down at your phone or your computer, and then, when you look up and it's blurry. I don't know if that happens if you're young, but I know that happens to me. And I remember it happening in school, actually. You'd be looking down and then all of a sudden you look up and it's blurry. And that's kind of it fits with the analogy. You look up and it's you have the world literally in your hand in your phone, but your own world is blurry. And I love that you are here to kind of help these students get some clarity.
That I like that blurry phrase because it is blurry for them. It isn't clear. And I think even just the first step of lifting their head up is something we've also kind of repeated that mantra. We have a program called Looking Ahead. We have another workshop for teens called Heads Up, literally trying to help them lift up and look out so that their eyes are open and they can see the possibilities. So,
yeah, I love it. So before we get into your organization, I want to kind of introduce you. And I like to start off by asking everybody, if you were at a dinner party and you were chatting somebody up, new person, and eventually everybody usually asks, what do you do? How would you reply?
I usually say something like, we help teenagers. I lead a team of folks that help teens move through high school and make better decisions at the end of high school. And then someone would usually say, well, how do you do that? And I would say, well, with my magic wand. How else do you think I would? I don't. Nobody does. I'm just through a lot of hard work, tears, pain. No tears either, but just joyful exploration, trying to get that teen to think about who they are and what makes them tick, and see how who they are can connect with all kinds of different work that exists that they don't even know exists. So it's that joyful painting the vision for them of how things can look. And then that
Yeah.
person would have left me at the dinner party and they would have said, no, they just put out some of those little crab puffs. So I'll see you later.
That sounds good. No, I love that. And I love that you gave the follow-up because I tend to ask that as well because sometimes people will say like, "Oh, I do this," and it kind of ends and I'm always curious like, "Well, then what? Like what happens? Like where does the conversation go?"
Yeah.
So, I want to also go back like when you were a kid because you work with kids, what did you want to do as an adult, as a big
I
grown up?
I didn't have, I mean, everyone looks first to their parents. That's what you see every day. And it's what you have probably the most exposure to from a career perspective. My dad was an engineer. He studied civil engineering at Purdue University. My mom, by the time I could pay attention, she had grown up in the field of education and had gone back and gotten some additional schooling in the Montessori method. I don't know if you are
Okay.
at all familiar with Maria Montessori and her methods. And then my mom opened up her own preschool, private preschool. So my mom
No
was essentially
way.
a business owner. And my dad worked for a large pharmaceutical company in Indianapolis in engineering and facilities management and production planning and that kind of stuff. So I looked at what they both did. And I think the most appealing parts of like my dad's role, I liked the thinking, I liked planning, I liked the professionalism that just seemed, those are the earliest elements I could tell you that felt like a fit. Like anyone else, though, there was a severely limited exposure to any other things. so, I don't know. And when it came time to choose a college, I had two older brothers, and they had already made the decision to go to the place where our parents had met, and that was Purdue. We
Okay.
grew up in Indiana, state school in the state of Indiana, great school, not difficult to get into. So way back then, today it's quite difficult to get into.
Yeah, it is.
Different ball of wax, but basically back then, if you wrote a check and had a pulse, you could be a Boilermaker. And so that's what I did. And I followed a brother into the exact same major that he was in, which was essentially a blend of business and information systems. And that is what
Okay.
I studied. So it was computer information systems. So it was called computer technology then, but it was basically within corporate organizations. So that's what I studied. Don't I strike
Which
as the most classic information application developer, database administrator? That's what I grew up to learn to do.
Well, yes, I can actually see that. I can. I would say you have some more pronounced social skills, some more pronounced verbal communication skills. So it's funny, your dad, as a civil engineer, I spent a lot of time recruiting for civil sales engineers,
Oh,
which was
wow.
like
Yeah.
kind of, I know, yeah. So it was like civil engineers, but sales. So they
Yep.
had to have both people skills and that kind of
Well, Courtney,
technical skill.
you understand then fully why my social skills during college were what caused me to doubt or question whether I wanted to really go and just sit in a room and code
Yeah.
and or be a little part of a big team that was coding. That felt like that wasn't going to, I'm not sure how I would have said it back then, something like play to my strengths, or that wasn't going to let me be who I was. And I ended up seeing someone who came back he was a graduate of our program. He was doing something quite unique. He's had an opportunity to speak to us, and he was a sales engineer for a technology
No
company.
way.
And that was the very first time I ever came to know about that role. And I remember where I was sitting. I remember who I was sitting next to. I think I remember what I had on. I can remember what he had on. It was one of those, oh my gosh, moments. And that is what I ended up doing right out of
Mm.
college. So I went into the vendor world working in as a sales engineer, technical half of the sales team, and then made the transition into sales and into management, into picking up marketing, and then doing that with a variety of different software vendors through my 20s and into my early 30s.
Okay. All right. So I think also something that is very interesting about the way you describe that is the fact that you remember all of these specifics about
Yeah.
this kind of like aha core memory, if I will say, at the
Mhm.
core, huh? Um,
Mhm.
and that's very important. So I think if people have one of those memories where they for whatever reason, remember these weird things. Like I remember where like that this random person I don't talk to anymore was sitting next to me. And I remember what I was wearing and I remember how cold it was in the room or all those specifics. There's a reason you remember that. And there's a reason it's like embedded in that memory and it's not going anywhere. And those are those kind of key moments to pay attention to. And it's great that you had that gut instinct to follow it, especially back in the day when you were graduating and software development was kind of the big thing, right? It was like new, it was exciting, like computers were
Yes,
like,
but no one really knew what it was. So back then, application development, systems analysis, it was something that you'd like hear somebody on Jeopardy when they'd introduce themselves and they'd say they were a systems analyst and people would be like, yeah, I got nothing. My mom is still lost on what I did at that time in my life. And, no clue. So today, of course, it's just a whole different paradigm, right? With
yeah,
application
yeah.
development today, we still need application developers. There's just a different set of tools and a different strategy that they use. So I guess the key though to that career journey with that first job out of college is that I got lucky, Courtney. I got
Mm,
lucky. If I would not have come to that class, right, that day and seen him speak, I would have probably at some point encountered someone in that role and learned about that role later. But it was just luck. And I'm not a big fan of luck. I'm a
mhm.
bigger fan of taking action. And that's a great part of what drives the wisdom that we try to share with teens in their high school years today is there are lots of things you can do right now that will help
Mhm.
shape your sense of what you want from your transition to the working world. But you can't just cross your fingers and hope, right? Or
Yeah.
rely on a happenstance. It's much better when you take action.
Yeah, and so I have 2 questions about that. One, I love that that you said that you're not a fan of luck because neither am I. I feel like I
Yeah.
went a long time thinking like other people were just so lucky. And I came to this quote at some point and I forget who said it, but it's like preparation plus opportunity equals luck. So there's
Yep.
really like no such thing as luck. It's just being prepared for the opportunity when it presents itself, which I love because it gives you control. So it's not just like, oh, whatever happens and I have no control and I'm just here, like being thrust into whatever. So that's one thing. The other question I have for you is why did you even go to that speaking event?
Oh, it was a required class. So I went. I acted more like a firstborn. I don't know if you think much about birth order.
I
I read
do.
a lot about that. I felt a lot of the obligations. I was not a firstborn, but for some other reasons, I think I had some of those traits. And so if someone said you had to go to this class, I would typically go to that class. So that's why I went. I knew looking back, our program in college knew that was a critical part. They would have someone new come back and talk to us about the work that they did. So they were attempting to expose us to the kinds of work environments and the kinds of work that we could do as we came out of college. So I'm very grateful to this day for that specific experience.
Do you remember what class it was?
We used to call it dress for success. It was
I
not
love it.
it was not called that, but that was what we called it. It was really like a professional preparation. I should really grab my Purdue transcript and find the name of that class.
That
That
would
was
be
years
fun.
ago.
Yeah.
You're asking me hard questions. I'm 55 and I'm like, I have a hard
I know.
time
I just
remembering.
think it's interesting. I think it's so interesting.
Yeah, it was a great class.
Every college should have a dress for success class, and that's what they should call it. So remember it.
Which gets us into that idea, right, of the things that students can do to take action during those college years, or even really, I think, better during those high school years, again, so that they get that exposure in that sense. And I know we'll get to it at some point, but just as important as that aha moment that I had where I felt that could be a fit for me, just as important are the moments when we try something and we say, and that is not right for me.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
The eliminations are just as critical.
Yeah. And I was just listening to something and I heard this phrase like failure is feedback. So
Yeah.
it's especially in college and when you're young, it's like just try it. There's nothing to lose, right? I
Yep.
mean, it's just all feedback. So tell us about at the core when you created it, when this idea kind of came to you And you don't have to go super in depth about it, but I am
Yeah.
curious to know when people kind of transition from that kind of safe space of like you have your 401k and you have your paycheck
Mm.
that's coming in and that stability into this more entrepreneurial venture.
So that
Yeah.
I will have to thank my husband and partner. So together we did that heavy lifting before our kids came along. And then we were able to make that decision that one of us, if one of us could stay home with the
Hmm.
kids, especially in those first formative years, that we would do that. And through that analysis of where we were in our careers, it made the most sense for me to do that. So through those early years, I did that with the kids, went back and did some part time work along the way. So my ability to step away from that 401k, from that normal, is really due in great part to his shouldering of that responsibility in our family. And also on some part, as all families have to, the adjustment of moving from that two income family
Mm.
to a single income family and what that's going to look like. So hats off to my husband for that. In the work and how it really emerged, most entrepreneurs see a problem that they recognize. And then, so part of it is just that problem recognition. And then the other piece is, can I do something that might solve that problem? So it's really those two pieces that kind of have to fit together to be able to take a step to solve the problem. So you mentioned earlier that I had hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of interviewing experience. And that interviewing also came in the form of that classic job interview, but also the interviewing that comes with the sales, the pre sales process for a very expensive software solution. There are a lot of interviews that have to happen in that pre-sales process of understanding your current solution. Where are the challenges? What is the opportunity? And interviewing at all kinds of different levels before you come back and propose a solution. So much interviewing I had done in
Hmm.
my past. Couple that then with this opportunity where I was seeing nieces, nephews, family, friends, neighbors with these older teenagers who were starting to make that transition to what would come next. And I would ask them some basic questions about, tell me what's on your mind. What are you thinking? What do you think you might want to study and why? And where is that going to take you? And they would just be like, most of them had some pretty crappy answers. I'm not going to lie.
Okay.
They were weak answers and they knew it. They knew they were not strong, or sometimes they were strong in their answer, but I knew that they were just posturing. And
Mm.
that's a word we still use today. They were just saying, I'm thinking about this. But underneath that, I didn't think there was a lot of evidence to back that up. So began asking these teenagers just those deeper questions about their strength, their interests, their values, their lifestyle goals, their preferences. Do you
Hmm.
prefer a knee that looks like this or one that looks like, just some real basics. And they would say at the end of those short conversations, no one's ever asked me questions like that before. I've never thought that way about my future and who I am before. And I thought, aha. So I thought, here's a need and I
Yeah.
have skills. Maybe there's a way to marry that together. And that was really the genesis of a process that started 12 years ago when I began interviewing those first kids and has now morphed into an entirely better process, that's done by people who are so much better at it than I ever was. Amazing facilitators on our team who do that process that we call guided self-assessment. So it's a self-assessment
Okay.
process that's done, it's verbal interview based, that's done together with a guide.
Nice. Nice. And are the guides, what are their backgrounds? Like,
Mhm.
are they career counselors? Are they teachers?
Or did they come out of IT like me?
Or
Um,
did they come out of IT? Are they moms? Are they dads?
Many of them are trained career counselors. So some of them do so in a higher education setting today. And
Mhm.
they love getting to come and do that same kind of work with that younger teenager or student who's still in high school. Some do come from education or from maybe school counseling or even from HR and people development, because a lot
Mhm.
of those same traits and skills are applicable to the work that we do. So yeah,
Yeah.
they come from a variety of different backgrounds, but those are some big ones.
Nice. Yeah. And what I also think is really interesting is that you saw this issue that you were also experiencing, you were experiencing it through your friends and family, knew that there needed to be something done about it. And what I'm finding interesting is that you were like, I'm going to create this organization because I know it needs to be done, but I might not have those skills, those whatever career counseling skills that are needed. Maybe I do, but maybe there's somebody better. Let me hire people
Oh, heck
to
yeah.
do that, which I think is really interesting because I think that especially now, I think it's like quit your job and be an entrepreneur and you do all of the work and you do, you capitalize on those skills. So, how did you come to that decision to create this organization and hire these people as opposed to like doing it all yourself?
Well, remember, I did have the luxury of not having to stomp on a gas pedal and immediately replace an income that I had elsewhere. So I
Mhm.
did have a luxury in being able to kind of grow it and take it slow. I also did not know. I mean, anytime someone comes to the market with anything new that never existed before, you don't know how the market is going to respond. I mean, you can have this great thing, but people may not hear about it. People may not respond to it. It may be priced incorrectly. It may not be the right deliverable. So I really had to kind of get my feet underneath me in that first 6 to 12 months and figure out, is this something that the market support and at what price? So I said, and I'm still kind of shaping the product. I mean, the early reports that I was delivering to families and the early meetings I was having, I was really still shaping the right way to deliver this output. Once I got on my feet after 6 to 12 months, there was enough of a knock on the door for, hey, you did this for my friend, and she told me about this, and we want to have this same kind of help for our son or our daughter. I recognized, I can't do all these at once. I think I'm going to need to have someone other than me. The great thing about that very first person that I hired was that she was actually the spouse of an entrepreneur, her husband, serial entrepreneur. So she had some tolerance for my entrepreneurial ways. And she also had some immense guidance for me.
Mm.
So I thought that was, and she was super smart and had come from a field of education. And she was able to immediately shape and morph and tweak the process and the product, and she was able to shoulder her set of kids that she could do. And I didn't even know, can I train someone to do this? So
Yeah.
I really had to crawl and then walk. And then there came the second facilitator. And then there came a client who said, really like what you're doing. Do you need some help getting the word out? And I'm like, oh, what will give you that idea? And yes, I need help. So she came on and joined, and we began, building our first marketing plans. And here we are all these years later, 12 years later, just slowly growing, building new products and new messages, shaping that core product of guided self assessment, teaching new facilitators to do it, attempting to grow our market and also have on staff the right number of people to do it. So it's always an interesting challenge, but that's how it
Yeah.
started. I didn't know if it would grow or not. I think as most entrepreneurs don't, you hope that it
Yeah.
will, but you don't know.
Yeah, and I also appreciate the fact that you knew that it was going to take time, right? I think especially now, we live in this kind of instant gratification world and yeah, if you haven't heard. So, I think just understanding that creating your own thing out of thin air takes time and like you said, there is no magic wand, right? So, there's a very big degree of patience that's needed.
And also, sorry, not to interrupt you, but
No, yeah, go.
patience and I think a willingness to try something. You mentioned that failure phrase, failure is feedback. That is very much true for an entrepreneur, right? We're going to try this thing that we never did before. And then we've got to measure, how did that, what was the response that we got? Was it expected, unexpected? Did someone come back and tell us, you should maybe go this direction instead? So that kind of willingness to put something out there, get that feedback, and then retool is critical to an entrepreneur's success.
Yeah, and keep your head up, right? And not let it kind of beat you down.
Yeah. You can't take it personally. Yeah.
Yeah, no, right. Yeah. Okay, so I do want to talk about like this guided self-assessment that you've mentioned, and if you were to give kind of like the 2-second elevator? Yes, elevator pitch for your business, shoot it at us. Yeah.
Sure, for sure. So at the core, well, I'll do it if you'll allow me for both our core product of guided self-assessment and the company overall. So
Yeah.
guided self-assessment was built as an in-depth interview-based process that really is an alternative to those quick hit career assessments. The
Mm.
poof, you should be a this, right? It's the alternative to that lets a student make better decisions about what they do after high school. So, what kind of major, what kind of career am I pointed toward? That's guided self assessment, all one on one, all sourced from that teenager, right? We're not
Mhm.
getting information from anybody else. And then the company, a little more widely, we do that work regarding self assessment and career exploration with teens. But we also do work because we found that a huge need for information about educational path planning. Like, what is the college process? Do I need to go to college? How do I connect careers and majors? And what should I do in high school that helps me think about and prepare for so educational path planning. We do a ton of webinars. Most are free. Some have a low price ticket of $29 just to help cover some of our own expenses. But we're very much information deliverers to families that are craving information in a time when there's a lot of confusion in that college. Do I go to college? And in fact, just super quick on this one, light detour. If you know any, I'll call them 13 to 16-year-olds, they are stunningly skeptical about the value of college. And they're very verbal about it. And so a lot of moms and dads are like, oh no, we think it's still valuable. And yet at the same time, they're looking at the cost and they're going, well, maybe not that valuable.
Right? Yeah.
Kiddos are super skeptical right now. They're not positive that it makes sense to do a traditional 4-year degree and for someone to spend that money. So we're in a real interesting space with
Yeah.
high school students as they're thinking about what comes next.
Yeah, and as I was kind of preparing for this, that thought did pop into my head, is college now more of like a check? Like, okay, like go get through it, like just get it so it's on your resume. Or, in the past it was like you need this in order to get a job. And it was also, if you were lucky enough, more about the experience as well, But
Yeah.
has that kind of morphed into just like, let's just get it on the resume as quick as we can and
So I would tell you so much of a choice of what you do after high school should be tied to what your career or at least first job goals are, right? So if I have
Mhm.
my eye on these kinds of jobs, and I think it's probably worth backing up and talking about how do we even get a 16-year-old to put their eyes on these kinds of
Yes,
jobs.
yeah.
But once they have an these kinds of jobs feel right, there's a very natural next step in that research to determine what do those jobs require from an education perspective, right? Do I need a BS or a BA to this? Do I need a graduate degree? Can I really just start with my high school diploma and some credentials to enter
Mhm.
this field? There's all kinds of things out there, and I know what's gone away is the perceived golden ticket of finishing college, and they'll just be somebody there on the other side with a catcher's mitt ready to employ you. You can absolutely spend $100,000 plus for a college education today and come away with nearly zero marketable skills that
Mhm.
anyone will hire you for. And that is a complete shame because no one's thinking that is what's going to happen. But without some planning and intervention, that is entirely possible.
Yeah.
Now, it is also possible to pay $100,000 for an education and come out and have those people with the catcher's mitt waiting for you because you have chosen to study something that built skills and experiences. And maybe you had internships along the way in college that made you highly valuable to certain
Mhm.
employers. That college experience, you can pay the same thing and get out and have the the wall experience or have the hey experience. Just depends on a lot of things you do while you're there.
So what do they do while they're there to get those people waiting?
Well, you have to study something that will make you in demand. So
Mhm.
you would have to know which jobs in which fields have a number of openings. What kinds of things would I study to move toward? And, STEM always comes up. I probably just rolled my eyes there.
She did.
I was a STEM kid before STEM was a word. I don't even really like the word STEM because I think it's too, I'd rather that we delineate it a little more carefully with some of the fields that were within what we call STEM. But in general, people will talk about STEM, healthcare, even manufacturing, engineering, IT. Those are kind of classic. If you get skills in those areas, there are job openings,
Mhm.
by the thousands that
Yeah.
exist that you can align with. So, but aside from that, so someone may say, well, I want to study philosophy. Well, if you want to study philosophy in college, that's awesome. You're going to have to be the one, though, that is responsible to help build other skills along with your study of philosophy that will cause an employer when you finish college to be able to hire you because they'll know that you can do what you need them to do. That's not the college's job. It's your job as a student, regardless of what you're studying, to align yourself with that very next step that comes super quick, which is making that transition into the working world.
Yeah. What are like the biggest struggles that you see with kids trying to going back to even just tuning out all that noise and that guided self-assessment? Like what is the biggest struggle that they come up against even just figuring out like what it is that they want to go for?
I think most of the time, if they're not given the opportunity to do that kind of deep self reflection and that thinking. So
Mhm.
let's say, so most of America does not get connected with my team and doesn't create that opportunity for their student to go through that process. So most American students are just moving through high school and they're experiencing what they are. And we just cross our fingers and we hope that they get to the end of high school and have an idea of where they want to go. And that's not a great, as we know, hope is not a great strategy.
Yeah.
So what
Mhm.
is their struggle? Their struggle, I think, primarily comes from what we call career illiteracy. No one likes to be called illiterate. And I often call teens to their face. I'll tell them that I call them career illiterate. And they're always like,
Mhm.
and then I say, but think about it. Are you really career literate? And they're like, no, we're really not. So you're right. We're pretty illiterate. That is
Mhm.
a real challenge, Courtney. If they can't see the kinds of jobs that are even out there and they haven't done that self reflection, that self assessment, that consideration of who I am and what I'm really good at and what I struggle with and what I enjoy, how will they ever make the connection between who they are and the kinds of work that can be helpful to them? It's that
Right.
they're gonna guess and grasp instead of, moving forward with confidence and clarity.
Yeah, and that is kind of what has informed like the current climate in careers, which is like the whole reason I started this podcast, which is, most people have career depression. They're just not happy in their careers. And it starts with the like this really young age and it
Yep.
sounds super young, but I think you're right because a lot of the time kids are just like, this is what I'm good at. This is what I get good grades in. So this is what I'll go after, or they do what their parents have done, or they'll listen to what their parents think they should do. And they kind of end up just doing that. And then at 35 or 40, being like, I don't want to do, why am I doing this? And
Yeah.
then they're like, now it's too late. So I'm just going to keep being upset like for the rest of my career.
Well, and it's not too late. We know it's not too late.
Right. Right.
But it does take effort to retool and step across to something else. And it takes a lot of things to be able to do that. But it is not too
Absolutely.
late. It is not too late. But that's why I think if we back things up to high school, it's helpful. The other thing that is a helpful argument in today's society is that the cost of college is so tremendous. And it
Mhm.
has now caused most Americans to say, is it worth it?
Right.
And I think just asking that question, is it worth it, causes you to ask the next questions. Well, it's worth it if I can see the return on the investment. How does our family making this huge financial investment, taking out loans, making sacrifices, et cetera, so that you can go to college, how will that result in a return on that investment? And that's a really interesting conversation and a different kind of conversation in a lot of families. But I think
Yeah.
it's an important conversation because we are talking about a decision that has a lot of zeros on the end of it. And we're talking about, an 17, 18, 19-year-old person, they will admit their brain is not fully developed. And yet we're getting ready to make this big
Huge
financial
decision.
commitment
Yeah.
on their behalf, right? And so again, crossing fingers, we don't want to be we want to have as many experiences and check marks as possible to help support that student as they go forward so that they're going forward with confidence.
Yeah.
And that kind of comes back to the things that they can be doing in high school, really just trying stuff out anytime that they have an opportunity to take an elective or career technical education is unbelievable across this country. It's awesome, awesome experiences for our kids. Being open to educational options, even doing things like informational interviews and job shadows. And I'm okay if mom or dad layers in on some of that because kiddos they get real weirded out if they're going to talk to somebody who does a job and they don't know that person. So it's okay if mom or
Yeah.
dad joins for that. Just making the effort to learn more about careers. Join us for one of the many things that we teach because we're trying to inform and make it very accessible for students to gain access to these resources that exist. I think those are things that if that can become part of the daily, weekly, monthly routine of a teenager to have that awareness, have those experiences, evaluate those experiences, learn more about careers, be open to educational options, those things are going to pave a path toward a better decision at the end of high school than one that's just, I'm going to college.
Yeah.
And that doesn't feel like a solid decision.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, there are so many gems there. One thing that really stood out is also one of the reasons that I wanted to do this podcast is there are so many careers that people don't know about, especially
Yes.
kids, because
Yes.
why would you know about it? Like as you grow up, you hear about those main ones,
Yep.
lawyers and doctors and healthcare and all those things. I remember when I was going into college, nursing, it was like, if
Yep.
you go into nursing, you will have a great job stability. Woo. Other than that, like, even my dad growing up as a young kid, I was like, "I don't know what he does business," like, it was, like, so vague to me in my, childhood brain. But, yeah, and I think we're kind of as we get older and into high school and then into college, we get a little, like, ashamed that we don't know about all these things, and there's a little bit of that, like, posturing, like, "Oh, yes, I know what you're talking about,"
Yeah.
and they don't, and it's okay, but there are so many careers that people don't even know exist, and like you can create your own career based
You
on your
can.
skills and feedback and all of that. So,
Or you can take two things and intersect them and
yes.
mind blown. Who even knew that, statistics and healthcare had a combination, kind of that bioinformatics type of stuff. Who knew? Those are real things. I mean, I think just to demonstrate that to kids is so critical. And also to help them right along that same line, there's a great resistance, and there always has been among parents and among students that they feel pressure to make a decision about what they're going to do for the rest of their life. I hear that kind of phrase a lot. And I never want a student to feel that pressure. First off, I want them to feel the opportunity. I get to decide what I
Yeah.
want to study in college, and I get to decide what kinds of jobs are a great fit for me when I'm all done with my schooling. And then in regards to the rest of your life kind of concept, bat that down right away because anybody who's 16 or 17 or 18 today, there are jobs, of course, that don't exist that they will
Yeah.
encounter in their life 10 years from now. So when you come out of college, which is a very quick 4 years, the first and real only goal that you need to have is what that first role is out of college. Think
Mm,
only about that. Read those job descriptions, those job postings, figure out what that first step is. From there, life will take over, right? You'll meet people and have other experiences and pick up other education. No one does at pretty much the same thing for their life anymore. And I would never want a teen to expect that, but they do
Yeah.
have to have their eyes on the first role that they'll take when they're done with their schooling. That's a lot less pressure. That's a lot
It
less pressure.
is. It is. It's a lot less pressure. And the great thing is that even if you don't like that first job, like let's say you land it, right? Let's say
Yeah.
you land this great job and you don't like it. It's okay. You're only 22 or 23. Like you have the rest of,
Uh,
your life to figure it out. But
and your step to the next job will be more informed because of
yes,
your sense of, well, now I know that this isn't a fit for me or this kind of thing or this kind of thing. I want to really dial those things down in the next role that I choose. So you're going to be wiser about that next role that you seek because of those experiences.
exactly. Yeah. And well, I have two more questions that I really want to ask. One, you mentioned, different types of educational experiences. And right before we started recording, you were telling me about your kids and your son and how they both did co-ops while they were in college
Yep.
and they graduated the same year. And I was like, oh, are they twins? And you were
Yeah.
like, no, they did this like crazy thing that. So can
Yeah.
you talk about that a little bit? Because I think it's a really great example of not just like putting her head down and going through this, like, I have to do years of college and now I'm going to do it and like graduate and hope that I get a job. Because they were really proactive about
They were.
positioning themselves well.
Well, who is their mom? So in a way, I feel a little bad for them that but they would tell you it was very good experience. So when our kids head off to college, they can absolutely choose a college where they can have kind of that traditional college experience, right? Go to college for, sadly, sorry, don't want to get into this, but less than half of all students will complete a 4-year degree in 4 years. But let's set that aside for a moment and
Okay.
imagine that your kid is going to be in that minority and will go to college for 4 years. So they'll go in the fall, they'll, come home in the winter for winter break, they'll go back in the spring, and then they'll have their summer off. And they'll do that 4 times and then they'll graduate. Many of us are familiar with that concept of summer internships, right? Seeking out a formal job experience, hopefully in your field that allows that student to gain some experiences and gain those first ideas of what they want from work and what they want from their work environment. Summer internships, though, have kind of a cousin or a sibling that are called co-ops or cooperative education. And the little couple differences with co-ops, so a couple differences. One, they're offered throughout the year, so not just in the summertime. So in the summertime, one of the tricky parts about summer internships is that hundreds of thousands of college students spill out into summer,
Yeah, it's
take
crazy
over,
competition.
and they're all competing for these same, handful of summer. So when you choose to do a co-op, you are outside of that summer only cycle, and you may find opportunities to again pivot away from school for a fall semester or a spring semester, and then pivot back and do maybe a summer semester. And so co-op is just a little different that way with timing. It also often has a relationship between the college, the employer, and the student. So sometimes
Mhm.
that triangular relationship where the employer and the college will be in communication with one
Yeah.
another. Now so love that too, so that there's some loop that's happening, right? So some colleges do the co-op thing very well. And so, like they make it just baked into your student's college experience. You will do this. So for a younger student, her major at her college required that she had 3 paid co-op experiences in her field prior to graduating. Our son's was more optional, but he chose also to do 3 co-op experiences. So they're very grown up experiences, right? You have to manage housing and you have to manage, think about that 3 different experiences, different work environments, different coworkers, different job responsibilities, eyes open wide every time.
Yeah.
And then leaving and saying, okay, I never want that again. Or, I want more of that. So that I think weaving in that work experience, however you can do that, during college is so critical, but that co-op piece is just such an interesting animal. And it's not appealing to everybody because some people want the traditional, I'm at
Hmm.
school in the fall, I'm at school in the spring, and I'll just, come home in the summer. But I think it's worth thinking about when you're evaluating what the college experience can be for each of your kids.
Yeah, I think so. And it just brings up the whole concept of just how different the environment is in a workplace as opposed to college. And I remember, and I think we talked about this. I remember, okay, so you're in college, you get to pick what time your classes are at, which let's be serious, we're in college. So it never before 10. Like if you do, I remember doing like 8 a.m. classes and people were like, why did you pick that? I'm like, I don't know. Like, why did I pick that? So by the time you're a senior, you got that down and you
Yeah.
usually figure it out so you have Friday off, right? I remember that
Yeah.
also being a thing. So you're going from this like
Friday and Monday for most
yeah,
students.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I like Monday off too.
You're going from this like dream
Yeah.
schedule for a
Yeah.
22-year-old and all of a sudden you're thrust into like a 9 to 5, which might be an 8:30 to 5:30 or and commute and all of the things. It's just like culture shock. It's like a totally different scenario that you're going through every day. And that can if you're a morning person, great. But like for me, I was not like that college schedule is great for me because I had insomnia. It was like a whole thing. So that was like a crazy transition that was really difficult that no one had any empathy for, which is fine, whatever.
Nope.
But
Nope.
also
No,
no
but
one told me about. So there was no like there was no heads up, like this might be difficult because it takes your body a little bit of time to get in a different rhythm. So I think just because of that, because of my traumatic experience, it wasn't traumatic, but you know what I mean. Co-ops are great,
well,
Yeah.
co-ops are great because that you get that early exposure, right? You understand what the realities of a workplace can be like. And it also, I love when a student works in maybe a smaller organization and then in a much larger organization, just so that they have kind of some of those comparative elements. And I did thinking about that transition from your formal education and for many from college to the working world. I did tap into our oldest kiddo that he studied accounting and did those three co-ops. So he is just passed his first CPA exam a couple months ago. We'll
Oh,
take the next
wow.
one.
Good
So
for
he's
him.
that business math numbers money guy. But I asked him for his tips about that transition from college to
Hmm.
work. So if you don't mind, I'll credit him.
Yes, please.
The very first one he mentioned was exactly what you just said, which was the structure of a work environment versus that of college. And I asked him what his tip would be for a student, and he thought about it. And he said, and I'm not sure how realistic this is, but he's very logical. So he said it would be great to treat that last semester in college with a bit more structure so that
Mm,
you had something of a sleep schedule, something of a time schedule. You were sort of practicing to not, I mean, it's hard to do that in your last semester of college because you do want to, go off the rails and have a great time. So
totally.
that was tricky. But he was kind of saying if you sort of eased into it, then it wouldn't be so much of a shock. The second thing he brought up was in terms of that transition was the challenge of having a good grasp on how to communicate effectively. I thought that, so the differences, think about that, the differences between
Yeah.
how we communicate with one another as college students and how we communicate in the corporate world, kind of that more formal, what expectations are versus that more casual form. And he also felt that, again, those co ops or internships are a great exposure to communication so that,
Yeah.
you're not shocked by that. And his third one that we talked about was that mixed age environment of work,
Oh,
right?
that's so
Isn't
interesting.
that a good one? So he came out, we're in college with people who are very similar in age to you, a few years older, a few years younger in general. And then we come in and we may have our cube may be close to retirement and we just got out of college, right? He said it can be tough to get used to. He said his tip though was, please don't laugh. He said, you have to remember that they were young once too. And that he said it is a little weird to hear a co-worker talk about their kids and those kids are, your age or older, right? But the key he felt was to look for that common ground, find the things that you have in common. So I know.
That's
It's
so
like,
sweet. Oh my God, he sounds like such
why?
a yes, so wise. There's something really valuable about having that mixed age group that this is like, these are people with a ton of experience. You can learn from them. And most people, and I think this is something when you're young, especially girls, I think, but when you're young, you're shyer. You don't want to kind of admit that you don't know, right? There's
Yes.
this resistance towards like feeling dumb.
Yeah.
And you're not expected to know everything. You're new in the workforce, and people want to help. People like to feel important. They like to feel knowledgeable. Just like you don't like feeling dumb, people like to feel smart. So use them, let them feel smart. They'll like you even more for it. And if you can grab a mentor anywhere, like that was something that I wish I could have known back then. Like find someone that you kind of vibe with that is older, and not so that you're using them, but
Yeah.
so it's this more symbiotic relationship where
That's right.
you're learning from them and they're also, guess what, learning from you. Because I can tell you, like, I don't think I'm that old, but like I am so glad that I have a friend in their 20s, because I don't know TikTok. Like, how is it different than Instagram? Please tell me. Like, I still don't know, but I know it is, and I know it's important. So
But back to your point, the only thing I'll add to that is that word mentor can strike fear in a 22-year-old. Like they don't know what it looks like. They don't know how to find one. They don't know what that relationship might pan out to be or not be. So that can be daunting. And so we know what that means, and they'll learn what that means as time goes on. Maybe the smaller step for that new just transitioned from college to work student, that new employee, might be to just learn the phrase to say when they push back their chair on the day that they're in the office, because a lot of people are hybrid or, there's
Mhm.
all kinds
Yeah.
of different work challenges with that. But when you push back your chair and you want to ask somebody in your view for a hand with something, what phrase are you comfortable using? So just being able to practice that vulnerability and say, Mary, do you have a minute to show me how I might solve this problem? Or, whatever phrase is comfortable for you. So it's to your point, it's going to expose that you don't know something and you need their help. So I think your personal phrasing of how to do
Mhm.
that is important to be able to not feel stupid as you're saying
Mhm.
that, or yeah,
Yeah.
or ignorant or whatever. So just practicing that could be a great help.
Insecure, I guess that's a nicer word. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. Yeah. And phrasing is very important. The words we use and the language, just in terms of how other people read it and how it just makes you feel. Right. So I love that. Oh my gosh, I could keep you on forever, but
This has been a great conversation, Courtney.
I know
I
I
love
love
this.
it.
Thank you. And I know we need to wrap up, but yeah,
Well, I was just curious, do you have anything coming up? Any at the core announcements or anything like that?
we always have things that we're doing, especially in that area of educational path planning, where we have all kinds of things throughout the year to support students as they're making those, getting informed and making those decisions about what comes next. So there's always a whole slate of webinars. We are constantly having our calendar of available spots for those guided self-assessment student and facilitator engagements that we plan for those weeks and months in advance. And we do those for students all over the country. So we are based in central Ohio, but we serve families across the US. So for those families that are local in our area, we can do those meetings at, a Panera or a coffee shop.
Mhm.
And for those students that are in Park City, Utah or, Portland, Maine, we do those meetings online. So if anyone ever has questions, we have a policy of answering any quick questions anyone has, even if they're, which do we take, the ACT or the SAT, or, how much does that guided self assessment cost, or any of those things in between. Just give us a call or hit our website and email us from the website, whatever format or form you'd like. And that website is gettingatthecore.com. So getting like GETING, getting at thecore.com. And you alluded to the company name is tied to helping that student get at their core, right?
Yeah.
What inside of them, what makes them tick, because that is the key that will unlock the door to work you love.
Oh my gosh, you just wrapped it up so perfectly. Thank you, Beth. Thank you so much.
You are welcome so much. What a fun conversation. And thank you for including me in it. And I value and appreciate the work that you are doing to
Thank
help,
you.
avoiding career depression is a huge thing for everyone. Everyone should do work that they love. And
Yeah,
it needs to start with what's at your core. So we just happen to do this work with teenagers, but everyone can really apply the same concepts to their life.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We are going to include all of the links so you can find Beth and her company. If you have a teen, feel free to reach out to her. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode. I'm so grateful for your precious time and energy. And if anything resonated with you, please feel free to share with a friend and subscribe. If you're interested in career coaching, I would love to hear from you. Email me at Courtney@resume-careers.com and follow me on Instagram at Courtney Austin Page. Thank you so much and see you next week.